I want to ask you about some work that you've done that is related to aging, and it's also related to a component of aging that everyone is tuned into because it's so visible and people care about what they look like. As we all know, when you get older, most people to some extent will have their hair start to turn gray. So what is that at the cellular level? What's going on, and why does our hair turn gray in the first place?
So the reason our hairs and scalp hair, beard hair, other hairs are colored is because of this protein called melanin that's kind of incorporated in the shaft of the hair, and it's made. There's beautiful biology there. Each hair is the product of a little mini organ. Like my collaborator Ralph Paus at Miami likes to say, the hair follicle, which is like the bulb, right, and under the skin, from which the hair grows out, is like a mini organ. And there are cells there that are specialized in making this melanin colored, colorful pigment, and then that gets incorporated in the growing hair. So just in humans, scalp hair just grows continuously, and then it goes through a few phases, but it can grow continuously for very long periods of time. So that's the source of hair color. And in graying, then you lose that, right? So it's just the pigment is gone, and there's a few hypotheses and decent models for why this happens. And at this point, I'm not an expert in hair graying. Ralph is, but we looked at quite a few hair follicles and a lot of hair strands from people who participated in our study. And what we found, if you do electron microscopy, for example, you take a white hair and a dark hair from the same person, right? So it's the same genome, same environment, right? You're exposed to the same stuff, same emotional, psychosocial context, all of this. Yet in the same person, you have some hairs that go gray when you're like 30, and then some hairs that will stay dark until you're like 80. So there's like this beautiful diversity in a genetically homogeneous system, right? So these changes cannot be genetically driven. So that was the initial point of interest for us to be interested in that. If we could figure out the reason why some hairs are more, vulnerable to aging, and then they turn gray very early, and then some hairs are more resilient, this could be the key to understanding more of, the factors that keep some people resilient and some people, less resilient. So the graying is just the loss of the melanin in the growing hair.
And did this tie into mitochondria at all? Or?
Yes.
Yeah.
So initially, that was probably the only project that we started without having a clear understanding of how mitochondria would fit in the picture. But I had read some things when we started to think about hair graying and the idea that there is this heterogeneity. It could give us a new insight into the variability in human aging, inter-individual variation in aging. And then, we started to look in the literature, and there is some very nice work showing that the mitochondria produce reactive oxygen species, the stuff we were talking about earlier. And in the hair follicle where the hairs grow, there's something that seems to happen where the mitochondria can start to produce, too much reactive oxygen species. And this almost acts as bleach. And then kind of, bleaches the hair, and maybe has an effect on the melanocytes, the cells that make the melanin. So there's some cool biology there that people have been looking into for a number of years. And then there was this particularly, cool paper about mitochondria and what they call the ring of fire, like the ring of oxidative stress that could be involved in the hair graying. So there was some element, but, we didn't know. And really what was really cool with thinking about the hair-to-hair variation, what could be at the origin of this. And then very quickly, I was chatting with my partner, who's a neuroscientist by training, and then going through this reasoning of like the same body, same genes, right? Same genome, same environmental exposures, yet this heterogeneity. How the hell could this be? And then the idea was, well, what if you could find on someone's head, like you pull a hair and then the tip is dark and then the root is white, right? So somewhere the hair goes from dark, so it's young, right?
Yep.
And then it gets old. It becomes white. It loses its color.
Catch it at the time that it's,
Well, you catch it. The beautiful thing with hair is that it grows and it sticks to your head.
Yeah.
So maybe that transition from young dark to old white happened, let's say 3 months ago, but 3 months in hair time is 3 centimeters.
Yeah.
So, as long as you have hairs that are a few centimeters long, you can find these hairs that are two colored, or these bicolor hair. So, and that was neat, to think about. And then we thought, what if you could have hairs where the tip is dark, and then you have a white segment, and then it goes back to dark again. Like, what if this was reversible? And and then Mary said, well, I've seen hairs like this before. And then I thought, what? White hairs that can go back dark? She's like, yeah. She went to the bathroom and she pulled 2 out. So then she came back to the living room. She's like, hey, here. So right there we had, a physical evidence that the hair graying in humans is at least temporarily reversible. Which blew my mind. And then that kind of brought us to think about how this could happen. And then we did proteomics. So then we launched a study. It was called the SMA study, the stress mitochondria and aging hair, SMAH study. So in the SMA study, we started to recruit people, and we used a snowball recruitment method where, you tell someone, then they tell their friends, and then people were sending us Ziploc bags with hairs in them. And then we developed a method to digitize, the same way you would digitize pictures, old physical pictures, like in the good old days. You put the hair on the scanner, you stretch it. Ayelet is a student who was doing this in the lab. She would iron the hair out and then tape both ends. Then you have the hair all stretched out, and then you scan it at super high resolution. So you push the scanner to its max resolution, and then you get several pixels for each millimeter of hair. So you get beautiful spatial resolution, which becomes temporal resolution.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah,
because the hairs grow over time, and then we were able to quantitatively, for the first time, show that here's a hair that's dark. Boom. Here are the hairs that's white, and then it goes back to being dark again.
And do we know how common that is, and what might be driving it, at least?
Yes. So that was
that might literally be $1 million question.
So it's pretty common. This was Shannon Rouser, another student in the lab, that was her challenge to collect all of those hairs and do a study to see how this changes over time in relation to stress hormones and in relation to like life exposures. And then we developed a tool to map stress over the same period of time. If you have a hairs at 12 centimeters long, then that's about 12 months of time, right? So you have the historical record or the biological record of this person over the last 12 months and what happened in the way it's encoded in this hair. And then you can ask the person, to go through their calendar and identify the period over the past 2 years or the past 1 year that was the most stressful. And for most people, that's pretty easy. So yeah, this, last June, broke up with this, with my partner, and this happened, or, like changed job, or pandemic happened.
I see.
Yeah. And then what was the least stressful point of the past year? And then people are pretty good at identifying this too. And then we asked them to identify another like 6 points, and then you connect the dots, and then you end up with a profile of stress over the past year. It's flawed, from being retrospective, but that was sufficient to identify statistically significant correlation between events of life stress, events of graying. And then when the paper was published, demonstrating this, I've received at this point, about 60 emails of people from all over the world, which is amazing. People saying, people were telling me I was crazy, but I have the hair, it's taped on my fridge if you want it. Thank you for showing that, that I'm not crazy. So the reversal.
You mean people that had started to gray and then got their color black?
Yeah. And or they look in the mirror and say, oh, this weird hair it's white at the tip and it's dark at the root. How this is not supposed to happen, right? If aging is a unidirectional linear process that we're doomed to go through at a fixed rate, you're not supposed to see aging features reverse. So this kind of, I think that's why it's a little upsetting for people, and some people, react weirdly to this, because it upsets the paradigm or the framework from which we work. And I think this data shows hair graying and probably other features of aging are more malleable than we used to think.
I mean, did you at least start to get a sense of, was there a correlation between like, oh yeah, I had this really stressful period, someone died or I got laid off or whatever, And then something really great happened 6 months later, and that correlated with the color coming back.
Yeah. So the most striking example we have in the paper is a young, Asian participant who said, she defended her thesis, her PhD thesis, and then, things were fine for a few months. And then she said, I went through the most stressful 2 months of my life. And she went through a breakup and she had to travel and then she had to decide what she was going to do with her life. And so it was very stressful. Her physiology changed. She lost her menses for 2 months. And then after she decided to take a job in New York City and she moved to New York City and now things were good. And if you look at her stress profile, right, she finished her thesis. It was like a level 2 out of 10. And then the most stressful 2 months, peak at 10. And then around 8, 9 for 2 months, and then another peak at 10, and then boom, down to about 1, and then 1 for the rest. The hair graying pattern, you superimpose it on top of
It's the same.
The hair is dark, 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 and then boom, it becomes white for exactly 2 months of time. Then the stress subsides, and then the hair gets its color back. This was amazing. P equal 0.007, if you do statistics on that.
Now, that's remarkable, and it's totally believable. But at the same time, when you just look at people in our life, you don't usually see that, right? We don't really notice that. And so is it just an uncommon thing? Are these unusual individuals who had an extremely high amount of stress but low baseline? Or do you think that like anyone could achieve such a thing?
Yes, I think anyone can achieve such a thing. We've seen this now in like a 9-year-old girl from Europe. She had a white hair that reverted back to dark. Beard hair from like a 30-some-year-old male. Pubic hair from a 30-some-year-old woman. So it happens in all sorts of regions of the body and all sorts of people. When you start to look, then you start to find them. And I think we typically don't see them. I had never seen this. Yeah. And then when we started look, we found, we recruited for about 2 years. And we found 17 people. So it's not a ton, right? And since the paper is published and it was in the media a little bit, so it reached a large number of people. Out of everyone it reached, there's a fraction of those that noticed, that had experienced this. They saw 2-colored hair on their head, and 55 of those people kind of found my email somewhere and emailed me. So at this point, we think it's pretty common, and we ran a survey with my colleague Ralph Paus in Miami to ask those people who had contacted us how many hairs did they find in their hair, and was there stress associated with this transition, reversal, and so on. So it seems like it's decently frequent, and it's not kind of a once in a blue moon type of event.
Interesting.